Okay, well, welcome everyone. This is part of a series of meetings for our interns at the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice at the Urban League. Many of them are from different parts of the country, and we came to the conclusion that to best inform them, we should have a series of these meetings where we bring in people who've worked in key areas of the community to better inform us about their experience, and certainly for people who live outside the community, learning more about what the experts have to say can only be a positive thing. So I today want to thank Chris Hand for joining us. Our last speaker was for public health, and it was Dr. Jeff Goldhagen, former public health director, talking about the challenges moving forward. And he was certainly spared no language in telling the younger interns, younger that they are, that they're going to be responsible for our future, and we need their help. It was a good kickoff for the series. Mr. Hand is really an expert in our Jacksonville Consolidation and the history there, and wrote a epilogue to that in a book called The Quiet Revolution. Is very well done, and I recommend it to all of you. Maybe what we should do first is have the interns introduce themselves, where they're from, what they're working on, and then Chris, have you introduce yourself and take it from there.
Sounds good to me.
All right, and as always, I'm starting top left, and that's Beth Kogan.
Hi, I'm Beth. I'm from New York City. I'm going to American University in a master's program for ethics, peace, and human rights. And here I'm working on disability and transgender rights and criminal justice reform.
All right.
Nice to meet you, Beth.
And Sebastian.
I'm Sebastian. I am from Virginia Beach. I am studying economics and public policy at UVA, and I'm focusing on voter rights, criminal justice reform, and children's rights.
Thank you. And Sophia?
Hello, I'm Sophia. I'm going to be a senior at the University of Delaware. I study criminal justice. And right now I'm working on the Criminal Justice Reform Project and the Center for Children's Rights.
Go Blue Hens.
Thank you.
And Nicola.
Hi, I'm Nicola. I'm originally from Southwest Florida, but I'm currently a 2L at UCLA Law studying environmental law. And I've been working on environmental and public health issues.
Thank you.
Matthew Rosen.
Hello, I am from Chicago, and I'm at Boston University Law, and I'm focusing on voting rights and voter suppression issues this summer.
Thank you. And Jingyi.
Hi, I'm Jingyi. I'm from California. I'm an upcoming senior or rising senior at Johns Hopkins, where I study public health. And so right now I'm focused on working with the public health team, also the Population Health Consortium, and then racial healing and reconciliation.
Thank you. And Tia, last but not least.
Hi, I'm a student at the University of Iowa College of Law. Right now, I've been focusing on education, voter suppression, children's rights, and LGBTQ issues.
Thank you, Tia. So that's the group we have with us. We have others, but they're busy people and not everybody could join, but we're recording this as was announced at the beginning so that they can learn through the recording. So Chris, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Dennis, and thank you for all of your hard work to kind of set up this appearance today. I know it's been a little bit of a moving target in terms of dates, but really glad we could find one that worked for everybody. First of all, I am so grateful to have been introduced to all of you, hearing about your impressive backgrounds and where you are pursuing your educational studies and the subjects on which you're focusing. I have one question for the entire group. What would it take for us to get you to move to Florida after your academic studies are done? Because not only because of your outstanding accomplishments there, but because of the critical work you're doing, you touched off a variety of issues that I think are very vital, obviously to the national future and to the future of a lot of states, but particularly here in Florida. I was thinking about, as you talked about some of those issues, how they are some of the very issues in the news right now in the state of Florida. So I hope that, not to make this a recruiting pitch, because that's not what this is about, but I hope that we could at least encourage some of you to at least consider at some point making Florida your home. A lot of people ultimately find their way here, but we'd love for you to find your way here sooner rather than later. But thank you for the incredible contributions you make. Just to give you a little bit of a snapshot on myself, my name is Chris Hand. I grew up here in Jacksonville, and then had a path that sort of took me into public service. I graduated from Princeton University for undergraduate, and then I spent 5 years working for the United States Senate, first for Senator Bill Bradley of New Jersey, and then for a person who's become a very close friend and mentor, former Florida Governor and U.S. Senator Bob Graham. An amazing experience on Capitol Hill, but came back to Florida for law school. I went to the University of Florida, Levin College of Law, and have spent the bulk of the last 20 years either practicing law, but mostly in kind of public service or government or politics. And probably the most recent position I've had, I served as the Chief of Staff for the Mayor of the Consolidated City of Jacksonville from 2011 to 2015. So I've worked at every level of government, but have a particular interest and passion for local government, and also a passion for some of the work you're doing, effective citizenship, citizen engagement. Senator Graham and I wrote a book. I have written a couple of versions of a book called America, the Owner's Manual. The most recent version, the subtitle is called You Can Fight City Hall and Win, which is about how to encourage citizens to learn the skills of effective citizenship and then apply those skills in their own communities to make government work for them, which is something that all of you are practicing every day through your work with the Urban League, and of course the entire Urban League mission, especially the Jacksonville Urban League, is geared toward trying to help people engage with government. And a little bit later, I'll show you a copy of that book. And as Dennis indicated, the other book that I've recently written, I've written the 2019 version of what's called A Quiet Revolution, which is the history of Jacksonville consolidation. And that's really what brings us here today. And, you know, those of you, it sounds like, I don't know how many of you or if any of you are from Jacksonville per se, but you might be from other parts of the country and even other consolidated cities. But just to give you a little bit of sense of what consolidation is, because we do have quite a unique form of local government here in Jacksonville. There aren't many places across the country that have that. And consolidation, quite simply, was the historic merger of the city of Jacksonville with the surrounding Duval County to create what is today the Consolidated City of Jacksonville. It is a very large entity. We are the largest city by area in the contiguous United States. In other words, the 48 states, not including Hawaii and Alaska. There are some Alaskan cities that actually have more area than Jacksonville, but in the contiguous United States, we're the largest, 835 square miles. So an extremely large entity here, and that has almost 1 million people. So we are the 12th largest city by population in the country, the largest by population in Florida. There are some bigger metro areas and some bigger counties, but in terms of cities, there's none that are bigger than the city of Jacksonville. So our governmental consolidation created what is a very large and complex local government. And I thought I would today kind of talk you through a little bit about how it came about, what that government looks like, and then walk you through some of what's happened in kind of recent history of consolidation, and also some of the issues that our community is grappling with as we move forward into the future, which I think you'll find similar to issues that other cities are facing across the country. So, and just, you know, again, to give you some frame of reference for other places around the country that have gone to a consolidated model. If anyone hears from Indiana, the city of Indianapolis and its surrounding county are a consolidated government. If you're from Tennessee, Nashville and what's called Davidson County are part of what's called the Metro Davidson government there in Nashville. San Francisco is another consolidated city county. Louisville, Kentucky is yet another one. So there are a variety of large communities across the country that are consolidated, but Jacksonville was one of the first and really sort of set the model for this form of government, which has pluses and minuses. And, you know, I'll go through those in just a few minutes in this presentation. So I thought I'd just kind of walk you through some of those key aspects of our consolidated government. And then, of course, what I'd really love to do with a group, particularly of this size, is to have some back and forth, answer your questions, and not to be too, for those of you who are in law school will recognize this, I'm not going to be full Socratic method about this, but I might ask some of you some questions as we kind of walk through this conversation, because I'd love for it to be mostly that today. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of the history of consolidation. And again, it's all captured in this book, which Dennis referred to earlier, which is called, you may or may not be able to see it, but it's called A Quiet Revolution. I'm actually going to give Dennis a box of these books so that he can distribute them to each of you, you know, through whatever form makes sense. So you have that history of Jacksonville. But the origins of our consolidated government really date back to the early 1930s, around the time that Herbert Hoover was finishing his time in office as President of the United States. Back in August of 1931, there was a kind of an episode that's chronicled in the book, and I'll tell you more about the book a little bit later, where the then Jacksonville City Council refused to listen to a group of citizens who had showed up at one of their meetings with concerns about the budget. They were very kind of dismissive of their concerns and their input. So that led the next month in September of 1931 with 150 local leaders coming together and forming what was called the Better Government Association to do a top to bottom review of Jacksonville government. The end result of that review was pretty massive. A grand jury indicted close to 75 local officials following that top to bottom review. And it led to a vote in June of 1935 as to whether the city of Jacksonville and Duval County should be consolidated. Well, at that time, in June 1935, the voters were not inclined to merge the two entities, and they voted no. So the city of Jacksonville sort of continued on its path. But you'll see in this later history, some of those same patterns begin to reemerge. So we fast forward about 30 years from the mid-1930s to the mid-1960s. And what you find at that time, that the city of Jacksonville is in real crisis. For those of you who have been here, you know that one of our most defining features is we have a massive river, massive and beautiful river, the St. Johns River, that flows actually north from Central Florida and exits the state of Florida in Jacksonville. I think it's the second biggest river in the world after the Nile, that flows south to north instead of north to south. But that beautiful river, which is a centerpiece of our community, was at the time thought to be hopelessly polluted. Around that same time, the Duval County schools lost their accreditation. Those of you who follow education know what a devastating blow that is for any individual school, but particularly for an entire school system to lose its accreditation. At the time, the city of Jacksonville had a very sort of Byzantine and unwieldy local government structure. For example, they had not only a city council, but also some city commissioners who were responsible for various aspects of the government. And of course, that was on top of a county government that had jurisdiction over some of the areas of Jacksonville outside the city limits, or Duval County outside the city limits. The government was in fiscal crisis, probably partially because of this Byzantine structure that it had. And you also had a period like the 1930s where multiple local government officials were indicted for corruption. So sitting there in the 1960s, at this moment where Jacksonville's in real crisis, much like local leaders had in the 1930s, a group of local leaders came together and came up with a solution, which was again consolidation. That group of local leaders urged the Florida legislature to let Jacksonville citizens vote on consolidation. And the legislature authorized a group called the Local Government Study Commission, which worked for a period of time and came up with a document called the Blueprint for Improvement. And that Blueprint for Improvement was a series of recommendations designed to consolidate the city of Jacksonville with Duval County and put into place a series of other government reforms to try and address some of the challenges that I outlined earlier. The legislature in 1967 approved a consolidation referendum, giving voters the opportunity to weigh in on whether Jacksonville should embrace this historic city-county consolidation. So just to give you a couple of key dates on that, on August 8th, 1967, and that's always very easy for me to remember because it was my parents' 3rd wedding anniversary, but on August 8th, 1967, voters approved consolidation by an overwhelming margin here in Duval County, and it took effect on October 1st, 1968. So as of October 1, 68, there was no longer just a city of Jacksonville, no longer a separate Duval County. A new entity was born, the consolidated city of Jacksonville. And as I said earlier, it created a really large city, the largest by area in the contiguous United States, 12th largest by population in the nation, and the biggest in Florida. And a good friend of mine and a longtime city of Jacksonville official named Rick Mullaney, who's the longest serving general counsel at the consolidated city of Jacksonville, Rick has called it the most significant local restructuring in the history of the state and probably the nation. And I think Rick's words are very applicable because consolidation created one of the nation's biggest and most impactful local governments. And I wanted to just briefly give you some of the kind of features of our local government because they are unique. You don't see them, or at least this combination of features, in a lot of places. So first of all, we have a strong mayor system. As those of you who study government know, many local governments are governed by what's often called a city commission, or counties are governed by a county commission type system, where there might be a mayor, but that mayor is often, the person who chairs the commission meetings, and the day-to-day operations are typically run by a city manager or a county manager. That is not how it works in Jacksonville. We have a strong mayor system where the mayor is the chief executive of the city, and he or she is directly responsible for the day-to-day operations of government and is directly elected by the people every 4 years. So the mayor and the council, city council, are distinct entities in government. That is different than many cities and counties across the country. We have a large city council, 19 members. And just to give you a sense of that, most Florida counties, I think the most any other individual Florida county has is 9 city council members. So we have 19. 14 of those are elected from individual districts. So they're elected from the neighborhoods in which they serve. And 5 of the council members are elected countywide or citywide. They have to live in particular parts of the city, but they are elected by the entire populace. And the reason for that is the framers of our consolidation wanted a blend. They wanted a large number of council members who directly represented neighborhoods so that they could try to be responsive to those neighborhood concerns. But on the other hand, they wanted to have some council members who weren't tied to particular neighborhoods so that they could maintain more of a global view of kind of the city of Jacksonville and what its future should look like. We also have some elements in our consolidated government that are required by state law. So for example, we have 5 what are called constitutional officers. Constitutional because they are set forth in the Florida Constitution. That's a sheriff who is the top law enforcement officer for the entire city, a Duval County tax collector, a Duval County property appraiser, a supervisor of elections who obviously runs our local elections, and a clerk of the courts, which is obviously in charge of the county, and to the extent the circuit court meets in Duval County here as well. We have a Duval County School Board that is made up of 7 members that is also part of the consolidated government. We have a really interesting and unique Office of General Counsel, in which the General Counsel represents each of those different entities I named. So a huge scope of representation, and kind of helps to mediate and sort of decide disputes among some of the different aspects of consolidated government. And last but not least, we have independent authorities, which are independent business units which run some particular function of city government. So for example, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority is our mass transit and road building agency here in the consolidated city of Jacksonville. JEA, which used to be known as the Jacksonville Electrical Authority, is our public utility. A municipally owned utility provides power and water to citizens. We have a port authority, which governs Jacksonville's very large seaport, which is a important part of our economy here. The Jacksonville Airport Authority, which governs the 4 airports that we have in Jacksonville, and a Downtown Investment Authority, which oversees efforts to revitalize economically the downtown core. So those independent authorities play really critical roles in the consolidated government. They're specific business units that have clearly delineated functions within the consolidated structure. So consolidation, and the reason I wrote the book that I held up earlier and that Dennis referred to, the reason I wrote an updated version in 2019 was the Jacksonville Historical Society recruited me to do that because it was the 50th anniversary of consolidation. We're just about to approach next year in 2022, the 55th anniversary of consolidation. And so during this 50th anniversary, there was a lot of discussion here in Jacksonville, and this is not uncommon. Age 50, I'm a lot closer to that than everyone else on this call is, but is a time of reflection for any individual and organization, and that was no different than it was for consolidation. So there was a real community conversation about consolidation. You know, how has it worked? Has it worked? Should it continue? If it should continue, how, if at all, should our consolidated model be revised or reformed? And, you know, if it shouldn't continue, what form of government should Jacksonville adopt instead? So as part of that conversation, and I'll talk about the book more in a second, came the new 50th anniversary version of this history and chronicle of consolidation, A Quiet Revolution. So at that 50th anniversary mark, and some of the same questions are continuing to circulate as we near the 55th anniversary mark, there are, I think, some universally recognized positives and negatives about the consolidated government model. One definite positive is efficiency. If you are looking to do business with government in Jacksonville, you are dealing with far fewer governmental entities than you would be anywhere else. And this is, the statistics I'm about to tell you are not a criticism of any other area, it's just kind of how they're different. If you go to, say, Miami-Dade County or Broward County in South Florida, each of those areas has more than 30 municipalities. So if there's something that you're trying to do county-wide, you might be dealing not only with a county government, but with numerous municipal governments as well. That is not an issue at the city of Jacksonville. There's one government. It is a consolidated city government. And so as a result, it is often easier and quicker and at least fewer government agencies to deal with if you are trying to do something in the consolidated city of Jacksonville, as opposed to areas that have many other municipalities in their jurisdiction. Another positive tends to be accountability. You know, unlike some other areas where there are a lot of different governmental entities, there's absolutely no question about where the buck stops in Jacksonville. There's one government, there's one mayor, there's one city council. If something falls under the jurisdiction of one of those constitutional officers or independent authorities, it's very clear who owns challenges and opportunities in the city of Jacksonville. So that level of accountability, I think, can be helpful for citizen engagement with government, because there's no question about, you know, who in government you should be talking to advance an initiative or to try and solve a challenge from that citizen engagement perspective. that efficiency and accountability has at times, not always, but at times made it easier for Jacksonville to kind of go about and pursue big projects and big initiatives. Probably the best example is, most of you probably know that we have a National Football League team here in Jacksonville. They've not had the best seasons of late, but we just had the #1 draft pick and we have a new coach, so there's a lot of hope here in Jacksonville. But the Jacksonville Jaguars were awarded to the city of Jacksonville in 1993. That came about as a result of a huge community effort to bring Jacksonville together, business leaders, others in the community united behind the effort to land Jacksonville an NFL team. And our consolidated structure, I think, was a huge benefit in being able to make that happen. And as a result, we're now approaching the 30th anniversary of having an NFL team here in Jacksonville. So there are some definite positives to that consolidated model, but there are also some aspects of it that people are concerned about. One, and this relates to a project that I think some of you have been working on with Dr. Danford. And by the way, I meant to acknowledge Dr. Danford at the beginning. I don't think he's with us today, but very grateful to be friends with him and grateful, of course, for his work in Jacksonville with the Urban League. But one project some of you may be working on, and I know is of great passion to he and Dennis and others, is the issue of neighborhoods. Because the city of Jacksonville is so large, our government, just by virtue of its size, some people are concerned that it can be somewhat monolithic and not always responsive to individual neighborhood concerns. And that's particularly concerning given that had consolidation never happened, some of these individual neighborhoods probably would have been jurisdictions of their own. For those of you familiar with Jacksonville, we might have had a city of Arlington or a town of Mandarin or a city of Durkeeville or a town of Phoenix. Those are individual Jacksonville neighborhoods that became part of the consolidated city of Jacksonville that might be on their own and might be more responsive to neighborhood concerns if they existed. And I'll talk a little bit more later. I know one particular Urban League passion has been the Neighborhood Bill of Rights, and we'll talk about that in a little bit of a different context. Another great concern about consolidation, and this is less about the structure and more about the implementation of consolidation, but when the consolidation campaign occurred in 1967, pro-consolidation advocates went into neighborhoods and assessed challenges that were happening in those neighborhoods and made explicit promises that those challenges would be addressed if consolidation were passed. So that's promises like pledging to replace septic tanks with central sewer, paving roads, providing street lights and sidewalks, ensuring access to potable and safe drinking water. Well, 53 years later, or now almost 54 years later, many of those promises still have not been fulfilled in Jacksonville. So as you can imagine, there are a number of neighborhoods in Jacksonville that are thinking, hey, we were told back in 1967 that if we voted for consolidation, the city would help address some of these longstanding infrastructure and other challenges in our neighborhoods. And that hasn't happened fully yet. There have been efforts over time to do that. In fact, the city of Jacksonville just passed a gas tax increase here that will direct some money to infrastructure and particularly focus on things like the septic tank problem I just mentioned. But there hasn't necessarily been a sustained effort over time to address those promises. And in some parts of Jacksonville, that has really impacted the credibility of our consolidated government. So that just gives you a sense of what people see as some of the pros and cons of government as we sit here, again, almost 55 years after voters approved consolidation. So I just want to talk very briefly about the book. And because of my Zoom background, I'm really not sure if you can see it or not. But again, you're all going to get copies of it. I'm going to deliver some to Dennis. And so, look forward to your reaction after that. But this book was originally written in 1968 when consolidation took effect. The original author was a gentleman named Richard Martin, who had been our local paper is the Florida Times-Union. Richard Martin had been the Florida Times-Union reporter who covered the consolidation campaign, covered the implementation of consolidation. And after consolidation took effect, he actually joined the consolidated government as the new Consolidated City's first public information officer, working for then Mayor Hans Tanzler. So he wrote the first version of the book, and he also wrote a 25th anniversary update in 1993. Very sadly, Dick Martin died in 2003. There was another update at the 40th anniversary written by a gentleman named David Genzel from the University of North Florida. And I was approached to write the 50th anniversary edition for the 2019 celebration. When the Jacksonville Historical Society approached me about writing the book, I, of course, told them I was very honored, but that I wanted to take a little bit of a different approach than past updates had done. The book had generally been written in a very kind of narrative style with some of these updates. Here are all the events that happened between X date and Y date. I wanted to take a little bit different approach and focus only on those events that really either displayed some of consolidation's unique characteristics, or in addition to that, and some of the events that shaped the future of consolidation. And in addition to kind of taking that look at the past, that historical view, I also wanted to look ahead and discuss what some of the challenges for the future of consolidation might be. So I framed it up as, what are the 5 questions that help to define the future of consolidation? I'm not going to get in too much to the first part today, that look back. I covered the period from 2007 to 2019. That essentially starts the beginning of the second term of a mayor named John Payton here in Jacksonville, and covers the end through the end of the first term of our current mayor, whose name is Lenny Curry, end of his first term in 2019. I'll leave that to you in the book to kind of take a look at that and kind of get to understand not just that period in history, but hopefully you'll get a chance to read everything that Dick Martin wrote as well about the history of consolidation and the consolidation campaign and how we ultimately got to the place where we are now. What I will talk about briefly today, and then I'd love to get into any questions and any conversation we can have, is kind of those 5 questions I identified for the future of consolidation. And the first one was what I referred to earlier in these unkept promises. Can we rewrite the tale of 2 cities? As I indicated to you, when the consolidation campaign was happening in 1967, a variety of neighborhoods were told, look, when we consolidate, you're going to lose some political power. But in exchange, you're going to gain all these infrastructure benefits that I referred to earlier in terms of ways the neighborhoods were going to be improved. And those promises were very explicit. I've gotten questions over time, well, did that really happen, or was it just anecdotal? I conducted, when I wrote the book, I not only conducted a variety of primary or consulted a variety of primary sources, but I also conducted, numerous interviews of past mayors, city council presidents, local leaders. And one of the ones I talked to was Alton Yates. And those of you not from Jacksonville may not know Mr. Yates's name, but he's a hero in this community. He's a personal hero of mine. He's a civil rights leader. Jacksonville had a horrible civil rights incident in August of 1960 called Axe Handle Saturday. He was one of the victims as a civil rights leader at Axe Handle Saturday, then went on to continue to be a community organizer and served in multiple mayoral administrations. So just an incredible community leader and public servant. And like I said, a real hero. But Alton was part of the pro-consolidation campaign and was one of the team that went around to these neighborhoods. And he was very clear that explicit promises were made to these neighborhoods that, look, you might lose a little political power, but you're going to gain a lot of benefits. So there's no question that these promises were made. And they were not just made. And a lot of the neighborhoods I'm referring to are places like Northwest Jacksonville, East Jacksonville, historically Black neighborhoods in Jacksonville that again were made promises that haven't been fulfilled over the nearly 55 years of consolidation. But it wasn't just those neighborhoods. While the promises were concentrated in some of those neighborhoods, they really were made citywide in a variety of ways. And again, comes down to a sustainability problem. In my opinion, addressing that problem and those lack of promises is the most important step that Jacksonville can take toward its future, because it's obviously, at least in my opinion, it's very hard to move forward with the future until you have reconciled the promises of the past. So I think it's very important the city of Jacksonville adopt as a mission fulfilling these unfulfilled promises from nearly 55 years ago, coming up with a comprehensive plan to address those promises, and providing some sort of sustainable funding source to help make sure we do that. Now, as I said earlier, a couple of months ago, we took a significant step in that direction by passing an enhanced gas tax, which is going to devote some revenue to addressing some of these issues, primarily the septic tank issue that I referred to earlier. But that's just one step, and we have many more to go to make sure that we achieve the justice and the equity and the equality that were promised in the late 1960s, but haven't been fully delivered nearly 55 years later. Now, there's another important piece of that, which is, I think we reference it in the book, but didn't go into deep discussion, and that is some of the important work that Dr. Danford and Dennis and others, and probably some of you, are doing at the Jacksonville Urban League, which is our Neighborhood Bill of Rights. In 1995, and I'm probably repeating some history that you've already heard in your work with the Urban League, so forgive me on that. But in 1995, the Jacksonville City Council enacted a Neighborhood Bill of Rights. But very unusually at the time, usually when the City Council passes something, it either goes in the charter, which is our kind of governing document, or goes in the City of Jacksonville Ordinance Code. But for whatever reason, the Neighborhood Bill of Rights didn't go in either of those. But obviously, what the Neighborhood Bill of Rights did was establish some guidelines for the city to utilize in dealing with neighborhoods. So things like prompt and courteous and informed responses to any questions about city business, and rapid responses to those questions. Giving neighborhoods advance notification of any public works or utility project that's going to happen in that neighborhood. Notification about any land use application that's going to happen, and making sure neighbors are aware of when they can provide input, how they can provide input, so that they are ready to be a meaningful part of that conversation. Giving an opportunity for formal input into the annual budget process, which includes the chance to express preferred priorities for a particular neighborhood or suggested infrastructure projects. And a timely response from your city council person. Every person in Jacksonville is represented directly by 6 members of the city council, their district council person, and 5 at-large members. So the goal in the Neighborhood Bill of Rights was really to have some responsiveness from council members. And then, the last piece, the opportunity to participate in the design and location of any publicly funded projects within the neighborhood. But like I said, there's a little bit of a mystery because these rights were intended to empower neighborhood organizations in dealing with city government, but they're not in our charter, they're not in our ordinance code for some reason, and now they're a quarter century old since they were passed in 1995. We had a task force in Jacksonville in 2019 that looked into public safety, and one of the particular subcommittees, in fact, Dr. Danford was a leader in this subcommittee, recommended that we readopt and reaffirm the Neighborhood Bill of Rights to make sure that those provisions are followed and that citizens have an active, engaged role in the work of city government. One of the recommendations that I've made over time, and I'll send to Dennis to distribute to you kind of a piece I wrote in 2020, is that I fully agree that we should make the Neighborhood Bill of Rights either part of our ordinance code or part of our city charter. But I also think we need to enhance it to address, what I think is the most significant challenge that neighborhoods throughout Jacksonville face, which is the lack of adequate infrastructure, despite those promises made decades ago. So, for example, some additional rights could include things like public school facilities that have the physical and technological infrastructure needed to fulfill what is a constitutional mandate here in Florida, a mandate that every student should have the benefit of efficient, safe, secure, and high quality free public schools. Or, you know, a neighborhood bill of rights to have well-functioning infrastructure, whether that's drainage or energy, parks or roads, sanitation, schools, sidewalks, and water, to have that well-functioning infrastructure, to have reliable sources of clean water. There are still neighborhoods in Jacksonville that have struggled over time to have access to clean drinking water. That is a right that every person in this community should have, to have safe and usable drinking water. And I've suggested a variety of others that kind of fit into that overall sort of infrastructure piece. So I think that is the kind of top concern that, and top issue that Jacksonville needs to grapple with going into its next era. There are other issues that I define in the book, you know, kind of the status of our independent authorities, whether our elections should be rescheduled, you know, how our general council structure should be managed, whether our city council is the right size and composition. And many of those are issues that other cities grapple with. And the equality issues that I've talked about are issues that other cities and counties grapple with. But I, you know, again, prioritize that in the book as the #1 issue to define the future of Jacksonville consolidation. There's been discussion about it. There has been, you know, some movement on it through this recently enhanced gas tax. And what I tried to do in the book with each of the issues I identified was not to necessarily inject my opinion, although, you know, I identified some issues which I felt were important, you know, which were going to be significant for the future, but really try to reflect a variety of perspectives, both pro and con, on consolidation in general and on some of these individual issues as well. So you'll probably see some of that, you know, once you get the book and have a chance to kind of take a look through it. Again, the first kind of 3/4 of the book is Richard Martin's history up to about 2003. The last part of the book are the 2 updates, including the one I did in 2019. So what I encourage everybody to do, because as I told you, the other book I've written is on citizen engagement with Senator Graham. You know, what I always encourage people to do in this talk is to engage their effective citizenship skills. Usually I'm talking to people in Jacksonville, so it's with the local government here. But I really encourage, no matter where you are, to use your effective citizenship skills with your local government, wherever that is. You know, here in Jacksonville, it's easy to remember that citizens gave our consolidation life through their votes in 1967, and its future depends on citizen voices. And that is true in every community around the country, that local government is an ideal place for citizens to engage, to identify problems and try to address them, to identify opportunities and trying to help the community make use of those opportunities. And we all have the citizen skills to do that. One of my favorite quotes is from former Illinois governor, United Nations ambassador, and 2-time presidential candidate Adlai Stevenson. And he said, "As citizens in this democracy, you are the rulers and the ruled, the law-giving and the lawgivers and the law-abiding, the beginning and the end." And that's true for all of us, no matter where we live. The success of our consolidated government here in Jacksonville or any other local government throughout the country hinges on the injection of new citizen ideas and new perspectives. And I know that all of you, just hearing the incredible subjects you're working on, you're already far down that path of engagement. And I really salute you for that and thank you for that. And I want to thank you for your hard work for the Urban League this summer. And of course, thank you, the Urban League nationally and the Jacksonville Urban League, for, you know, everything you're doing to practice effective citizenship, not only as it relates to issues of consolidation here in Jacksonville, but also it relates to making our communities as just and as equal and with as much equity as possible. So with that, I have talked on for a while, and I appreciate your patience and your indulgence, and I would love to answer any questions or just have any conversation, talk about whatever is on people's minds today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. This was a great moment in our history of the Center for Advocacy and Social Justice to have you with us. You know, we're only a year old in terms of actually operations. It took us a about a year and a half to get there. But we've accomplished so much, both through our interns, through leadership at the Urban League, as well as people like yourself that have come along to help us out. And by the way, I extended an invitation to you to join our Neighborhood Bill of Rights Coalition that most recently was joined by Carla Miller, head of ethics at the city. She's very much wanting to help us succeed in doing what you were saying earlier. But we can talk about that offline. I don't want to put you on the spot. But let's open it up to questions. I do want to indicate that Miss Lenny Finley joined us. She is our executive vice president. Richard is on vacation this week, so he could not join. Also joining us are Deborah Thompson, who is our representative to the NAACP, member of the Urban League. And I don't know if he's still on, but Chester Daniel was also with us for a while, who is taking the lead in our reentry program, among other programs. So
thank you all for your great work here in our community. It's great. That service is greatly appreciated.
So questions, interns, I will go around the virtual table if I have to, but let's just throw it open for questions.
Hey, Dennis, could I actually ask a question of the group first?
Sure.
I'm just curious whether any of you live in communities that have a consolidated government. I listed a few in the talk, but there's more than that. It's not I mean, it's a relatively small number of U.S. cities. But do any of you live in or are from or have lived in consolidated communities in the United States?
Hello, this is Solomon Crow. I'm the community engagement coordinator at the center. I'm originally from Columbus, Georgia. It is a consolidated government. I'm not sure how many counties and districts, but yes, I just based off of Jacksonville Consolidation, I kind of looked at Columbus first before I started to research about the Jacksonville Consolidation. And through that, I was able to start writing on the Jacksonville Consolidation and some of the problems that we see within it to this day. But I guess that's like my short answer to that.
Solomon, that's awesome, and thank you so much for sharing. I've spent some time in Columbus, Georgia, and my dad spent some time there. He was in basic training in the U.S. Army at Fort Benning in Columbus. But Columbus is such a fascinating place. I think there's a lot of similarities to Jacksonville. Jacksonville's obviously bigger, but Columbus, like Jacksonville, on a river, and in addition to being consolidated, also has the interesting characteristic of being, directly across the river on a very short drive. You're in Phoenix City, Alabama, so in a different state. So the metro area really is kind of multi-state. But thank you for sharing that. Columbus is a great example of another city that's done that. Let me just ask y'all, because it sounds like Solomon's the main person on the call who's lived in a consolidated city. I'd be curious for maybe each of you, if you have a second, to kind of let me know where you are from or where you're living and what you see is that some of the, maybe the biggest issue facing that particular jurisdiction. Obviously, every municipality and county has been impacted by COVID. And so that's obviously a big issue. But other than COVID, or maybe it's an issue that COVID has revealed or deepened, I'd be curious to hear from each of you as to what community you're from and what you see as the defining issue right now in that particular community.
Sebastian, why don't you start off?
Sure. I'm from Virginia Beach, which is right on the Chesapeake Bay. So it'd probably be something to relate to the Chesapeake Bay and pollution. But I'm not extremely sure. But in terms of Charlottesville, where I'm going to college, UVA, it'd probably be the affordable housing crisis.
Well, first of all, Sebastian, thank you for sharing. And my dad went to the University of Virginia Law School, so we are all Cavaliers fans in our house and have been for a long time. But and beautiful campus there in Charlottesville. But that is you have touched on an issue that affects, I think, probably every community in the country, and is an issue right here in Jacksonville. In fact, there was a Jacksonville Business Journal article just yesterday interviewing some of our local nonprofit housing developers about the huge affordable housing crunch that we have here in Jacksonville and across Florida. And that ties in directly with that issue of kind of neighborhood equity that I was talking about earlier, because you're seeing that all over the country, and Charlottesville being a good example where, it's just harder and harder for people to afford to live relatively close to wherever they work. Which obviously creates challenges for them, creates challenges for their employers. So I think that's a great issue identification. And I think affordable housing is probably going to be one of the top 2 or 3 local government issues over the next decade. I don't know what it's like in Virginia right now, but here in Florida, the housing market is red hot. People are seeing record prices for real estate. Of course, that makes the affordable housing challenge even bigger here in the state as those prices go up. So I think you've identified a key issue, and thank you for sharing that. Anybody else? I'd love to hear about other communities and other challenges, just because it's always helpful to get a comparative perspective of where Jacksonville is versus other places in the country.
Yeah, so Matthew is in Chicago, out just in Northbrook, just outside of Chicago. Has a good idea of what it's like not to have small towns consolidated with a big city. And also he goes to school in Boston, which is another place that's huge, but all those little towns are separated. In fact, we have as many or perhaps more students in our school system than Boston does because of the way it's split up. But go ahead, Matthew.
Well, I was just going to say, I feel like Chicago has every issue, but the first one that comes to mind is kind of violence, and specifically gun violence, which obviously you hear about a lot. Nobody really seems to have a solution for, but I feel like Chicago's such a big city. There's almost any issue you can name, equity, affordable housing, they're almost all an issue in Chicago that somebody's trying to solve and is probably failing at.
Well, and that's a good point, that the bigger the city, the kind of larger panoply of issues that they're dealing with at any given time. But you touched on one that, is on the minds of every city government in the country right now, that being crime and violent crime. As you know, there has been a wave of it across the country. Chicago's an example, obviously, as you say, where there's been a lot of attention on it. Atlanta is another city where there's been focus on it. And it continues to be a very persistent issue here in Jacksonville. We have struggled with a violent crime problem for a number of years now. It has pervaded a variety of city governments. And, I think our community is still trying to find, I think I mentioned earlier, there was a public safety task force that Dr. Danford was on a couple of years ago. Community's still trying to work toward figuring out what the proper blend of enforcement, prevention, intervention goes into some of those kinds of issues. But yeah, that seems to be an issue that many communities are struggling with right now. So thanks for identifying that one. I sure hope all of the different communities can help curb that and figure out ways to not just, stop crime, but also try and prevent it and give people opportunities and look for ways to invest in people for the long term as well.
And just on that note, there is violent crime that happens everywhere, but a lot of it is very consolidated in, certain parts of the city, which goes back to just general equality of where people live and how, certain areas can be made safer, because there are parts of the city that are very safe and parts of the city that are extremely unsafe. So it's not, there's certainly an inequality there.
That's a great point, Matthew. And I, you know, it goes back to a little bit here in Jacksonville, the conversation I had earlier. You know, I've always thought that one way to address, you know, some of these issues is to make sure that you have adequate public investment in all neighborhoods, you know, and when you have the sort of disparities that we've had here in Jacksonville in terms of certain neighborhoods having infrastructure investment, other neighborhoods not, that creates inequality and problems with equity and justice that I think help to create some of the underlying conditions for crime. So, you know, yet another reason to make sure that Jacksonville neighborhoods are on a level playing field is, you know, neighborhoods that are underinvested. I think that's an important way to address economic issues, but also address, you know, public safety issues as well.
Yeah, that's just a quick comment, and that's why we're so focused on the Neighborhood Bill of Rights and community engagement. So we have really three areas we're working on in that regard. One is the Neighborhood Bill of Rights. The second is a community engagement process that we're studying, and hopefully you can join us at our next workshop. I think it's July 22nd. That's going to focus on different systems that are used to engage the community and to help select something and then use it as a pilot. And the third area is the team that's working on criminal justice reform is focusing on the same thing, engaging the community and finding out what they feel needs to be done to reform the justice system. And indeed, the MacArthur Foundation recently funded about 15 cities to do exactly that. And we're hoping that we can borrow from some of the work that they've done and start to get more information to the city council, which has been working on this project. Before we close, I did want to ask Ms. Finley if you had any thoughts representing the leadership of the Urban League to share with the group and with Chris, if you're available. I know sometimes you listen in and are in the middle of a whole bunch of other things, so I don't want to put you on the spot. Are you with us, Ms. Finley? You're muted at the moment. All right, well, and we also had, but I think she must have just stepped off. I was going to ask Dorothy to say something, but she had to step out. So let's do one more before we close. And that's, I would say we could ask Jing Yi, because she is all the way out in California, yet she is a student in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins. So what's your answer to the question or the two questions for Chris?
I guess like going off about like issues in where we live, since Dennis said that I go to school in Baltimore City, just going off of what we're talking about, like a lot of the issues right now are just effects seen from like redlining and housing segregation. So like health outcomes and like violence, what we talked about. So yeah, and like life expectancy. So I think that's like the main issue is just the disinvestment in certain neighborhoods since like redlining, and it's just continuing now. Yeah.
Well, you've got a fascinating both East Coast and West Coast perspective, Jingyi, because of the different cities where you're involved. But you know, as Matthew and I were discussing earlier, it absolutely, underinvestment or disinvestment has huge implications in so many different areas, whether that's public health, as you've identified. And I think I heard you say earlier that you're studying public health, which would make sense at Johns Hopkins, given its just outstanding work in that area. So I'm really glad you got to hear from Dr. Goldhagen last week, because he really is just such an expert here locally. But huge public health ramifications. I'll just give you one example here. under Florida law, all but one county in the state can ask voters to approve a sort of special sales tax to fund public health in their communities. Our public health system is run by the University of Florida. It's called UF Health. All but one county. The one county that can't do it is ours, because there is specific language in the statute that excludes a county that has consolidated with one or more of its cities. So strangely enough, there are 66 counties in Florida that can choose to invest more money in public health if they want to, which in the aftermath of COVID, I think there's going to be a lot more consideration to do we need to make those kind of public health investments? And because of a quirk in state law, we're the one county that can't do that. So you're absolutely right. That sort of underinvestment, disinvestment has impacts on public health. It has impacts on public safety, like Matthew and I were talking about, because neighborhoods are, don't have the safe infrastructure they need to encourage public safety. It has an impact, obviously, on economics. That if, for example, there's a, those of you who live on the East Coast may be familiar with the highway US 1, which goes from Key West to Maine. Well, US 1 goes through some of those neighborhoods we're talking about here in Jacksonville, and there are large stretches of US 1 that don't have adequate infrastructure and never have. But what that means is that businesses generally won't locate there because there's not the infrastructure, the water, the power, everything else that a business needs to be successful. That has a huge impact on economic success, and not having the infrastructure impacts quality of life in these neighborhoods as well. Again, if you live in a neighborhood that doesn't have access to potable drinking water, that is a profound public health issue. So I think you've really touched on what is one of the major challenges in cities across the country is, there's a lot of ways that we can pursue justice and equality and equity, and it's important to pursue them in many ways. But one way to do that is through public investment and making sure that every neighborhood in a particular investment has adequate infrastructure and adequate public services so that they can enjoy economic success and quality of life and have public safety and enjoy good public health. I think that's going to be a defining issue for cities and counties across the country for many years to come. And, you've described some, very telling examples there in Baltimore City and Maryland. So, well, I know our time is at an end. I just wanted to close by thanking all of you. You're just doing such inspiring work. I look forward to following that. Thank you for taking such an interest in the issues that you have, your work with the Jacksonville Urban League and the center that's been established there. Just a real privilege and honor for me to be able to talk to you today. And, look, it's been hard at times over the last 15 or 16 months to feel positive about the future, but it really is easy to feel optimistic about the future when you're exposed to young leaders like all of you. So thank you so much for your hard work. I'll work with Dennis to arrange to get you copies of the book and some of the articles I've written on the subject, and that'll include my email address. So would love to continue a dialogue with anyone who'd like to do that. And if I could ever be of assistance in any way, please don't hesitate to let me know.
That's great, Chris. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And I always close these sessions thanking the interns as well for all the work that they've been doing for us and the work they're doing for society. It is just very impressive and most appreciated at the Urban League. And we look forward to working with you in the future, Chris.
Same here, Dennis. I look forward to that as well. Hope everyone has a great and safe 4th of July weekend and rest of your summer. Best of luck.
Yes. Agreed. Have a wonderful, great weekend and a safe weekend. Take care, everyone.